I have learned that the most effective way to watch a person is to become part of the furniture. In this house, I am the fading wallpaper, the hum of the refrigerator, the rug that Robert and Chloe wipe their feet upon before they head out to live their important lives. They see a woman who is slow, a woman who is soft, a woman they call pathetic when they think I am out of earshot. They do not realize that the very floor beneath them, the silk in Chloe's closet, and the high-stakes investment Robert brags about at his club are all sustained by my silent hand. I have absorbed their insults for decades, building an empire in the dark while they mocked my light. But now, Robert has started spending my money on a woman who calls herself my best friend, and I find my patience is finally reaching its limit. If you've ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to love you, please subscribe and like this video. It helps me share the stories of women who refuse to stay hidden. Comment below with, "I need to know what happened," to join me as I pull the thread on their carefully constructed lies. What happens to the parasites when the host decides she is no longer hungry for their love? The morning began, as it always did, with the scent of French roast coffee, the expensive kind Robert insisted on, even though he complained about the modest allowance we had to live on. I stood at the granite island, my movements rhythmic and quiet, buttering his sourdough toast exactly the way he liked it. Outside, the morning light hit the manicured lawn of our estate, a property Robert believed he had secured through a lucky break in the market 10 years ago. He never suspected the break was a shell company I had engineered to sell him the land at a loss. Robert walked into the kitchen, his silk robe billowing. He was checking his gold watch, a gift Meredith had allegedly helped him pick out for his last birthday. He didn't look at me as he sat down. He looked through me. "Eleanor, did you call the pool boy?" he asked, his voice sharp with a morning edge. "The tiles look dull. We're having the board members over on Friday and I can't have the place looking as drab as your wardrobe." "I'll call them after I finish the laundry, Robert," I said softly. I kept my eyes on the toast. It was easier that way. "Laundry. That's the extent of your world, isn't it?" He let out a short, mocking laugh as he reached for the newspaper. "Sometimes I wonder what goes on in that head of yours. Probably just recipes and coupons. It's a good thing I handle the finances, or we'd be living in a ditch." I felt the familiar, cold pulse of the silver stopwatch in my apron pocket, my father's watch. I used it to time my silence. I had given myself 3 more months of this. 3 months to finish the final acquisition of the Port Authorities that would solidify Etheris Global as a monopoly. Until then, I had to be the weakling. Chloe drifted in a moment later, her eyes glued to her phone. She was dressed in a $2,000 tracksuit, one she had told me she bought on sale. In reality, I had authorized the credit card increase on her supplementary account weeks ago. She pulled a chair out with a screeching sound that made my teeth ache. "Mom, I need you to steam my silver dress by noon," Chloe said, not looking up. "I'm filming a day-in-the-life video, and I can't have wrinkles. And for God's sake, stay out of the background this time. My followers keep asking who the cleaning lady is." "I thought your followers liked the family aspect of your videos, Chloe," I remarked, pouring her a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. Chloe finally looked at me, her expression one of genuine disgust. "They like glamour, Mom. You're a Midwestern tragedy. You look like you're perpetually waiting for a bus that's never coming. It's bad for my brand." Robert chuckled behind his paper. "She's right, Eleanor. You really ought to do something with yourself. You've let yourself go so completely that it's almost an insult to the work I put in to keep this family afloat." I didn't argue. I didn't point out that the tracksuit Chloe wore was manufactured in a textile mill I owned. I didn't point out that Robert's engineering firm had only survived the last quarter because I had anonymously diverted a government contract his way. I simply took his empty plate and moved to the sink. The doorbell rang at 10 o'clock. I knew it was Meredith before I even opened it. She had a way of ringing, 3 sharp, insistent pulses. She stepped inside, smelling of Chanel No. 5 and artificial sympathy. She was wearing a tailored suit that made her look like the high-powered executive she pretended to be. She handed me her coat without waiting for a greeting. "Eleanor, darling," she said, her voice a choreographed purr. "You look tired. Are you sleeping? You have those bags under your eyes again. You really must try the cream I sent over, or perhaps just a bit of sunlight? You're starting to look like a ghost." "I've been busy with the house, Meredith," I said, hanging her coat in the closet. "Robert said the board is coming over." "Yes, he mentioned it." She brushed a stray hair from her forehead, her eyes darting toward the study where Robert was working. "He's so stressed, poor man. He carries the weight of this entire family on his shoulders while you do whatever it is you do. It's a shame you can't be more of a partner to him." She walked toward the study, her hips swaying with a confidence that spoke of ownership. She didn't knock. She never did. I stood in the hallway, clutching a damp dishcloth, playing my role to perfection. To anyone watching, I was a forgotten wife, a woman whose best years had been traded for a comfortable cage. I retreated to the small sunroom at the back of the house, the only room Robert and Chloe avoided because it was too quiet. I pulled out my laptop, a device that looked like a cheap, 5-year-old model but contained a custom-built, encrypted operating system. A message from Arthur popped up on the screen. "Internal audit complete. Robert Vance has transferred another $50,000 to Stone Consulting Services this morning. Total redirected funds for the fiscal year, $1.2 million. He believes it's coming from the corporate emergency fund. Shall I freeze the Stone account?" I stared at the numbers. $50,000 for a consultation. Meredith didn't consult on engineering. She consulted on Robert's ego. They were using my money to fund their weekend getaways, their business dinners, and the jewelry Meredith wore while she mocked my drab life. I typed back, "No, not yet. Let him feel generous. Let him believe he is a king. I want to see how much of my empire he thinks he can give away before he realizes he owns nothing." I closed the laptop and looked out at the garden. A single rose bush was struggling near the fence, overshadowed by the taller, more aggressive hedges. I had planted it myself. It was quiet, hidden, and possessed thorns that no one had bothered to notice yet. I heard Robert's study door open. Meredith's laughter drifted out, a sharp, triumphant sound that echoed through the marble hallway. "You're a genius, Robert," I heard her say. "Eleanor is so lucky she has you to think for her. She has no idea what's coming, does she?" "She wouldn't understand it even if I told her," Robert replied, his voice thick with smug satisfaction. "She's just a simple woman, Meredith, and simple people are meant to be managed." I gripped the edge of the wicker chair until my knuckles turned white. My heart didn't race. It slowed down, turning into something heavy and mechanical. They thought I was a simple woman. They thought I was a pathetic weakling. They were about to learn that the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone has stopped noticed. The steam from the industrial iron clouded my glasses, momentarily blurring the world into a soft, white haze. I preferred it that way. In the fog, I didn't have to see the sharp, judgmental lines of Chloe's face as she hovered in the doorway of the laundry room, tapping her foot with a frantic, shallow energy. "Mom, you're being too slow," she snapped, checking her reflection in the darkened window of the washing machine. "The light for my transition shot is perfect right now. If you ruin the silver dress, I'm literally going to have a meltdown. Do you even know how much that fabric costs? I'm being careful, Chloe, I said, my voice steady and low. Silk doesn't like to be rushed. If the heat is too high, the fibers will scar. Scar? It's a dress, not a person. Just finish it, she huffed, checking her phone again. I don't know why we don't just hire a full-time maid. Dad says we have to be frugal because of the market. But then I see you just standing here, looking like you're in a trance. It's embarrassing. I moved the iron with clinical precision. Chloe had no idea that the market Robert complained about was a sea I controlled with the flick of a pen. She didn't know that her frugal father had spent $30,000 last week on a vintage wine collection that was currently being moved into Meredith's private cellar. Robert told Chloe that money was tight to keep her dependent on his generosity, a psychological leash he enjoyed pulling. There, I said, hanging the shimmering silver garment on a padded hanger. It's ready. Chloe snatched it from my hand without a word of thanks. She paused, looking at my hands, reddened from the steam and the hard work of maintaining a 5-acre estate almost entirely by myself. You should wear gloves, Mom. Your hands look like they belong to a field hand. If you're in the background of my video, I'll have to blur you out. She vanished down the hall, her heels clicking a rhythmic song of unearned superiority. I stood in the small, humid room for a moment, listening to the silence return. My hands did look old. They looked like they had carried weight. But they were also the hands that had signed the merger for the North Atlantic Terminal yesterday afternoon, a deal that would effectively double the Vance family's net worth, though only one member of the family knew it. I walked toward the foyer just as Robert was preparing to leave. Meredith was already there, waiting by the front door. She was draped in a trench coat of buttery Italian leather, her eyes scanning the paintings on our walls with a hunger she couldn't quite hide. "Oh, Eleanor," Meredith said, her voice lilting with that fake sisterly warmth. "We're heading out to the site of the new bridge project. Robert wants me to look over the aesthetic proposals. You know how he is. He says I have the eye for detail that the office lacks." Robert was preening as he adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at me, his gaze lingering on my faded denim apron. "We'll be late, Eleanor. Don't wait up for dinner. And try to do something about the foyer while we're gone. The brass on the sconces is looking a bit tarnished. It reflects poorly on me when clients come by." "Of course, Robert," I said. I reached out to straighten his tie, a habit from a time when I actually cared if he looked presentable. He stepped back, avoiding my touch as if it were a contagion. "Don't bother. Meredith already fixed it. She's much better at these things." Meredith gave me a small, pitying smile. "It's fine, Robert. Eleanor has enough on her plate with the chores. We should go. The contractor is waiting." As they walked toward the driveway, I watched them through the sidelight of the door. Robert opened the passenger door of his Porsche for her, a gesture he hadn't afforded me in 15 years. He believed he was taking his brilliant consultant to a high-powered meeting. He didn't know that the bridge project was a dead end. I had ensured the environmental impact studies would stall the project for years, tying up Robert's personal capital in a legal labyrinth. It was a test. I wanted to see if he would turn to me when he started to drown, or if he would keep trying to impress the woman standing beside him. Once the roar of the engine faded, the house felt cavernous. I went to the sunroom and opened my laptop. I had a video conference in 10 minutes with the board of Atheris Global. I dialed into the secure line. Arthur's face appeared first, followed by the heads of my various divisions in London, Tokyo, and New York. "Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Arthur said, his tone one of profound respect. The others followed suit, pencils poised, waiting for my directive. Let's begin, I said. Report on the Singapore acquisition. For the next hour, I wasn't the drab housewife or the Midwestern tragedy. I was a surgeon of industry. I redirected $40 million toward a green energy initiative and approved the liquidation of a struggling retail chain. My mind worked with a speed that Robert would have found terrifying. To him, I was a woman who struggled to program the microwave. To these men, I was the sun they orbited. One more thing, Arthur, I said as the meeting neared its end. My husband is attempting to secure a private loan using our primary residence as collateral. He wants to fund a boutique firm for Meredith Stone. Arthur frowned, his brow furrowing behind his spectacles. That's a bold move, Eleanor. He doesn't have the legal standing to leverage the house without your signature. He thinks he does, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. He's been forging my initials on minor documents for years to save time. He's grown confident. He believes I don't read what I sign. I want you to let the loan proceed to the final approval stage. Let him believe the money is coming. I want to see the exact moment he realizes the house isn't in his name. And Meredith? Arthur asked. Monitor her accounts. Every cent Robert gives her is a debt she will eventually have to repay to me, with interest. I closed the laptop as the sound of Chloe's music began to thrum through the floorboards from upstairs. She was filming her video, dancing in the silver dress I had painstakingly steamed. I walked to the kitchen and began to peel potatoes for a stew they wouldn't be home to eat. It was a humble, grounding task. As I worked, I thought about the bridge project Robert was so proud of. He thought he was building a legacy. He didn't realize he was building a tomb for his career, one brick of arrogance at a time. I was interrupted by a notification on my phone. It was a text from an unknown number. I saw them at the bistro on 4th, Eleanor. He was holding her hand. They weren't talking about bridges. You deserve better than silence. I stared at the screen. I didn't recognize the number, but I recognized the sentiment. Someone else was watching. Someone who didn't realize that my silence wasn't a symptom of my weakness, but the foundation of my power. I deleted the message and went back to the potatoes. The water in the pot began to boil, the steam rising just like it had from the iron. Unseen, high pressure, and capable of leaving a mark that never truly heals. The stew had been simmering for 6 hours, the scent of rosemary and slow-cooked beef clinging to the curtains of the kitchen. It was a heavy, comforting smell, the kind that makes a house feel like a home. But when the front door opened at nearly 10 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The air they brought in with them was sharp, cold, and smelled of expensive gin and city rain. Robert and Meredith walked into the kitchen, their faces flushed with the kind of shared excitement that usually follows a successful lie. They didn't see me at first. I was sitting in the darkened breakfast nook, a single lamp glowing over my crossword puzzle. To them, I was just another shadow in the corner of the room. It was a brilliant move, Robert, Meredith was saying, her voice high and breathless. The way you handled that inspector, it was masterclass. Once the private funding clears, the city won't be able to touch us. I told you, Robert said, tossing his keys onto the counter with a metallic clatter. Vision. That's what this family has been lacking. My father had it, I have it. It's a shame it skips a generation on the female side. He finally noticed me. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a greeting. He looked at the pot on the stove with a curled lip. Is that what I smell? Stew? He groaned, pulling a bottle of mineral water from the fridge. Eleanor, I told you we were eating in the city. The house smells like a cafeteria. It's peasant food. Meredith and I just had blackened sea bass. I can't come home to the scent of boiled potatoes. I thought you might want something warm for later, Robert, I said softly, closing my puzzle book. Meredith turned to me, her eyes dancing with a cruel, mocking light. Oh, Eleanor, don't mind him. He's just had a very sophisticated evening. Though he's right about the smell, it is a bit persistent. Perhaps you should open a window. Or better yet, just toss it. It's probably gone gray by now anyway. She walked over to the stove and lifted the lid, letting out a thick cloud of steam. She peered inside as if she were looking at a biological curiosity. It looks so beige, like a 1950s cookbook. How do you stay so dedicated to the mundane, Eleanor? I'd lose my mind if my biggest achievement of the day was a slow cooker recipe. It's a quiet life, Meredith, I replied. I stood up and began to move toward the stove to reclaim my pot. Some of us prefer the quiet. Quiet is just a nice word for empty, Robert muttered. He checked his phone. Chloe, get down here. We're discussing the launch party. Chloe appeared minutes later, her eyes bright. She ignored the stew entirely, leaning over a spread of brochures Meredith had pulled from her bag. For the next hour, I became the invisible waitress. I brought them glasses of ice water. I cleared the discarded brochures. I wiped up the ring of condensation Robert left on the marble. The guest list is crucial, Meredith said, tapping a red manicured nail on a glossy invitation sample. We need the A-list for Chloe's brand launch. Robert, you'll handle the corporate sponsors. I'll manage the socialites. And Eleanor... She paused, looking at me as I reached for an empty glass. A slow, manipulative smile spread across her face. Eleanor can manage the back-of-house logistics, Meredith suggested. She's so good with the details. The catering staff, the coat check, making sure the bathrooms stay tidy. It would save us a fortune in event staff, and it gives her something to do other than iron shirts. Chloe nodded enthusiastically. That's actually a great idea. Mom, you can wear that black dress you bought for the funeral last year. It's plain enough that you'll blend right in. People will just assume you're the head of the catering crew. It'll be much less awkward than trying to introduce you to the influencers. Robert didn't even look up to see if the suggestion hurt me. Done. It's settled. It'll keep her busy and out of the photos. I don't want the investors wondering why the wife of the CEO looks like she just finished a shift at a laundromat. I'll see what I can do, I said. My voice was a flat, emotionless line. In their minds, they had just solved a problem. The problem of my existence. They were planning a party funded by my dividends in a house maintained by my labor, and they were assigning me the role of a servant to avoid the embarrassment of my drabness. Psychologically, it was fascinating. They had so thoroughly dehumanized me that they felt safe discussing their disdain in front of me. They believed my lack of reaction was a sign of my lack of intellect. They didn't realize that every insult was being recorded, categorized, and filed away in a mental ledger that was nearing a very expensive total. I retreated to the sunroom once they moved their planning session to the den. I pulled my secret laptop from its hiding place. The screen glowed, a sharp contrast to the dim, neglected room. I looked at the mystery text from earlier. I had Arthur run a trace on the number. The number belongs to a burner phone purchased in a convenience store 3 blocks from Robert's office, Arthur's voice whispered through the encrypted chat. But the location data shows it's been active near your estate several times this week. Someone is watching the house, Eleanor, not just Robert. Keep an eye on it, I typed back. And Arthur? I want a full disclosure of Meredith Stone's personal debts, not her business accounts, her personal ones. Already on it. She's underwater, Eleanor. She's been leveraging her consultancy fees from Robert to pay off gambling debts in Atlantic City. He's not just funding a mistress, he's funding a black hole. I leaned back in the shadows. Meredith was desperate. That explained her sudden push for the launch party and her insistence on managing the socialites. She needed a new pool of victims to grift, and Robert, in his blind vanity, was handing her the keys to our social circle. I looked at the security feed on my screen. I could see them in the den through a hidden camera I'd installed years ago. Robert had his arm around Meredith's waist as they laughed over a bottle of wine. Chloe was taking a selfie with them, her face a mask of practiced joy. They looked like a family. They looked like they had already replaced me. I felt a slight, sharp pain in my chest, a remnant of the woman who used to love Robert. But I pushed it down. That woman had been ironed out of existence long ago. I clicked a button on my keyboard, authorizing a systemic audit of the bridge project's private investors. It was a subtle move, one that would cause a slight delay in their funding, just enough to make the investors nervous. I wanted to see how Robert handled the pressure when the visionary had to explain why the money hadn't arrived. The curiosity wasn't about the affair anymore. It was about the mystery observer. Who was the ghost in the machine? Who else knew that the quiet woman in the denim apron was the one holding the leash? I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. From the den, I heard the sound of glass breaking, followed by Robert's booming, irritated voice. "Eleanor, someone dropped a glass. Come clean this up before someone gets hurt." I didn't move immediately. I let the silence stretch for a full minute, a small, private rebellion. Then, I stood up, picked up a dustpan, and walked toward the light. The silence of the house in the mid-morning was usually my sanctuary, but lately, it had begun to feel like a countdown. I was in the master suite, stripping the Egyptian cotton sheets from the bed I shared with a man who looked through me. As I bundled the linens, I noticed a small emerald silk scarf tucked into the crevice between the mattress and the headboard. It wasn't mine. I didn't own anything that vibrant. My wardrobe, by design and by Robert's demand, was a sea of beige, gray, and muted navy. I held the silk in my hand. It smelled of jasmine and desperation. Meredith's signature scent. The sound of the front door opening signaled the return of the trio. They had been out for an early strategy brunch. I didn't hide the scarf. I draped it over the edge of the hamper and continued my work. A moment later, Robert and Meredith entered the room. They stopped short when they saw me. Robert's face flushed a deep, guilty crimson, but Meredith merely smoothed her skirt, her eyes landing on the emerald silk with a flicker of amusement. "Eleanor," Robert snapped, his voice overcompensating with aggression. "I thought you were going to be at the grocery store. You're behind on the rooms." "The delivery was delayed, Robert," I said, my voice as flat as the sheets I was folding. "I'm just finishing up." Meredith walked over to the hamper, her fingers trailing over the emerald scarf. She picked it up with a dainty flourish. "Oh, I must have dropped this when we were looking at the architectural sketches for the master bath renovation yesterday. Robert wants my input on the tiling. He says your taste is a bit too nursing home for the new aesthetic." Robert cleared his throat, looking at the ceiling. "Right. The tiles. Look, Eleanor, since we're all here, we might as well discuss the new arrangements. Meredith and Chloe have been talking, and they think the East Wing, your current sewing room and the sunroom, would be much better utilized as a dedicated content studio for Chloe's brand and a home office for Meredith's consultancy." I stopped folding. "That's where I keep my mother's furniture, Robert. It's the only part of the house that feels like mine." "It's underutilized square footage, Eleanor," Robert said, stepping toward me, his tone patronizingly slow. We're a high-performance family now. We can't have entire rooms dedicated to whatever it is you do in there. I've talked to the groundskeeper. We're going to clear out the gardener's cottage at the edge of the property. It's quiet, it's cozy, and you can have all your hobbies there. It'll be like a little retreat for you. You want to move me out of the main house? I asked. Meredith stepped in, her hand resting lightly on Robert's arm. Think of it as a promotion, darling. You're always complaining about the noise Chloe makes and the stress of the household. In the cottage, you'll be out of the way. You can garden, you can nap. You won't have to worry about being presentable when Robert's partners are here. The exclusion had finally moved from emotional to architectural. They weren't just ignoring me. They were literally attempting to evict me to the edges of my own estate to make room for the mistress's office. I'll need time to pack, I said. You have until the end of the week, Robert said, already turning to leave. The contractors are coming Monday to gut the east wing. Don't make a scene about it, Eleanor. It's for the good of the family. They left the room, their voices trailing off into a discussion about Italian marble. I stood by the bed, the bundled linens heavy in my arms. I felt a strange, cold vibration in my chest. It wasn't heartbreak. That had burned out years ago. It was the sound of a final bridge collapsing. I retreated to the kitchen to begin the lunch service. As I chopped vegetables, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the sharp pulse of Meredith or the frantic ring of a delivery driver. It was a single, long chime. I opened the door to find a courier holding a long, narrow box wrapped in black velvet. Delivery for Eleanor Vance, the man said. Personal and confidential. I took the box to the sunroom, the room that would soon be gutted. Inside was a single, ancient-looking key and a note written on heavy, cream-colored cardstock. The locks have changed, but the foundation remains. It's time to stop being the furniture and start being the architect. The board is waiting for the signal. A. Arthur. But it wasn't just a business message. The key belonged to the original Vance family vault, a place Robert believed was empty, a place he hadn't visited since his father died. I sat in the fading light of my favorite room, the key cold against my palm. Upstairs, I heard the sound of Chloe and Meredith laughing as they paced out the dimensions of their new studio. They were already measuring the floors I owned, planning to decorate them with the money I provided, while they prepared to exile me to a stone hut in the woods. I pulled out my encrypted laptop. My fingers moved with a lethal, practiced speed. Arthur, I typed. Proceed with the structural integrity protocol. I want the bridge project's private equity loan called in, today, and initiate the transfer of the estate's title from the Vance Family Trust to the Aetheris subsidiary. I want the deed in my name only by tomorrow morning. Are you sure, Eleanor? Arthur's reply came instantly. There's no going back once the title is moved. Robert will be notified of a clerical change by the bank. Let him be notified, I wrote. He wanted a renovation. I'm going to give him one he'll never forget. I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen. I began to plate the lunch, a delicate poached salmon for Meredith and Robert, and a simple salad for Chloe. I took the tray to the dining room where they were already seated. Robert looked at the salmon and then at me. The cottage is a bit drafty, Eleanor, so I've ordered you some space heaters. See? I'm looking out for you. Thank you, Robert, I said. I leaned over to set Meredith's plate down. As I did, I let my hand slip, just enough for a drop of the lemon dill sauce to land on her leather jacket. Oh, Eleanor! Meredith shrieked, jumping up. You clumsy cow! Do you have any idea what this costs? I'm so sorry, Meredith, I said, my voice trembling with a fake, pathetic fear. My hands, They're just so tired lately. I'll go get a cloth." "Forget it," Robert snapped, glaring at me with pure vitriol. "Just go. Go to your room. You're becoming a liability just by standing there." I turned and walked away. As I reached the hallway, I didn't go to my room. I went to the basement, to the heavy iron door of the vault that Robert thought was empty. I inserted the ancient key. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click. Inside, the vault wasn't empty. It was lined with rows of black ledgers and a series of digital servers that hummed with a low, predatory energy. This was the brain of Aetheris Global. This was where I had built a billion-dollar empire while Robert was out playing at being a visionary. I looked at the screens. The bridge project's stock was already beginning to dip. The first cracks were appearing in Robert's world. He wanted me in a cottage. He wanted me out of sight. I looked at the monitor showing the front gate. The mystery observer's car was there again, a sleek black sedan. This time, the driver's window rolled down. I saw the face of the driver. My heart stopped. It was Robert's brother, David, the man the family said had died in a climbing accident 20 years ago. The man whose death had left Robert as the sole heir to the Vance name. David was alive, and he was looking directly at the security camera, a small, knowing smile on his face. The plot wasn't just a betrayal of a wife. It was a haunting of an entire bloodline, and I was the only one with the keys to the truth. The gardener's cottage was a stone-walled structure at the far edge of the estate, originally built for the staff in the 1920s. It was charming in a rugged way, but the air inside was thick with the scent of damp earth and decades of neglect. As I carried the last box of my mother's china across the overgrown path, the main house loomed behind me like a glowing, unreachable fortress. Robert and Chloe stood on the terrace, glasses of sparkling wine in their hands, watching me as if I were a hired hand finishing a day's labor. Meredith was there too, leaning against the stone balustrade, her laughter carrying on the wind, a sharp, metallic sound that felt like a needle against my skin. "Don't forget the space heaters, Eleanor!" Robert shouted, his voice jovial and cruel. "I wouldn't want you catching a chill and missing your duties in the kitchen tomorrow. The board members expect a 5-course meal, and I told them my wife is the best unpaid help in the county." "I have them, Robert," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I stepped inside the cottage and shut the door. The silence here was different. It wasn't the suffocating silence of a woman being ignored in her own home. It was the heavy, pregnant silence of a predator waiting for the moon to rise. I didn't unpack the china. I didn't plug in the cheap plastic space heaters Robert had bought to soothe his conscience. Instead, I went to the small, scarred wooden table in the corner and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, the blue light reflecting in the window pane against the encroaching dark. "Arthur," I spoke into the headset. "Status report on the bridge project's private equity." "It's hemorrhaging, Eleanor." Arthur's voice was crisp, seasoned with a touch of grim satisfaction. The lead investors received the anonymous tip regarding the forged environmental signatures. They've pulled the secondary funding. Robert's firm is on the hook for a $10 million insurance bond by Friday morning. If he doesn't pay, the city seizes his equipment and blacklists him from future municipal contracts. And the loan he tried to take out against the house? Denied. The bank notified him an hour ago that the title was no longer in his name. He thinks it's a clerical error at the county recorder's office. He's been screaming at a junior loan officer for the last 20 minutes. I leaned back, the wooden chair creaking beneath me. $10 million. To a man like Robert, it was a death sentence. To me, it was a rounding error in the Aetheris quarterly earnings. I could save him with a single keystroke. I could watch him crawl back to the main house, a hero once more. But I looked at the box of my mother's china. sitting on the dusty floor of a shack, and I felt the last of my mercy evaporate. A sharp tap on the window made me jump. I turned, my heart hammering. A man stood in the shadows of the porch. Even through the distorted glass, the resemblance was haunting. It was the same jawline, the same deep-set eyes as Robert, but aged by a life lived in the fringes. David. I walked to the door and cracked it open. The cold air rushed in, bringing with it the scent of pine and old secrets. "You shouldn't be here, David," I said. "Everyone thinks you're dead. If Robert sees you—" "Robert only sees what he wants to see, Eleanor," David said. His voice was gravelly, a stark contrast to Robert's polished, arrogant baritone. "He saw a brother who was an obstacle to the inheritance, so he ensured I stayed dead. And he sees a wife who is a servant, so he's put her in a cage. He's always been blind to the things that matter." "How long have you been watching?" I asked. "Long enough to see that you're the one holding the match," David said, stepping into the sliver of light from the doorway. He looked at the laptop on the table. "I didn't come here to stop you, Eleanor. I came to ask if you want help burying him. I have the records from the 2004 audit, the ones our father tried to hide before he died. The ones that show Robert started his firm with stolen pension funds." "I don't need help, David," I said, my voice hardening. "I've spent 30 years building this trap. I don't want a partner in the aftermath." "I'm not looking for a partner," he replied, his eyes narrowing. "I'm looking for justice. Robert didn't just steal my life. He spent the last 2 decades mocking the memory of it. I want to be in the room when he realizes his pathetic wife is the one who turned out the lights." I stared at him for a long time. David was a ghost, a loose thread in a tapestry of lies. If I brought him in, the exposure would be total. The Vance name would be charred beyond recognition. "Go back to your car," I said. "I'll contact you when the board meeting starts on Friday. Until then, stay in the shadows." He nodded once and vanished into the darkness of the woods. I closed the door and sat back down at the computer. I felt a strange, cold thrill. Robert thought he was dealing with a domestic squabble. He thought he was managing a homely wife. He had no idea that a ghost and a billionaire were conspiring in the woods at the edge of his lawn. An hour later, the roar of an engine signaled Robert's return to the main house. A few minutes after that, I heard the heavy thud of footsteps on my porch. The door was kicked open. Robert stood there, his tie undone, his face a mask of sweating, panicked rage. He didn't look at the room. He marched straight to me and grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging into the bone. "The bank, Eleanor," he roared. "They said the house isn't mine. They said the title was transferred to a subsidiary of Atheris Global. What did you sign? Did you talk to a lawyer behind my back? Did you let someone trick you into signing away our home?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Robert," I said, my voice trembling with a practiced, pathetic frailty. "You told me the papers I signed last month were for the tax exemptions. I just do what you tell me." "You idiot." He shoved me back against the table, the laptop sliding precariously. "You've let some shark take our house. I have a $10 million bond due in 48 hours and I have no collateral. Everything I've built, it's all tied to this property." He began to pace the small room, his breathing ragged. He looked around at the damp walls and the boxes. "You have to call them. Whoever you talked to, you tell them your husband is the CEO. You tell them there's been a mistake." "I'm just a housewife, Robert," I said, looking up at him with watery eyes. "You said it yourself. I wouldn't understand the finances if you told me. How am I supposed to talk to a bank?" He let out a growl of pure frustration and turned to leave, but he stopped at the door. He looked at me, and for a second I saw a flicker of something that might have been regret, but it was quickly swallowed by his vanity. "If we lose this house, Eleanor, it's on you. Your stupidity is going to be the end of us. I should have listened to Meredith. I should have replaced you years ago." He slammed the door so hard, a pane of glass in the window cracked. I sat in the dark, listening to his footsteps recede. I reached out and steadied the laptop. My hand wasn't shaking. I clicked a button on the screen, opening a direct line to the city's lead inspector on the bridge project. "This is the chairman of Atheris Global," I typed. "I believe you'll find the discrepancies in the Vance engineering blueprints to be significant. I suggest you initiate the seizure of assets immediately." I closed the laptop and leaned my head back against the stone wall. The cottage was cold, but for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel the chill. The bond was due in 48 hours, and I was the only one who knew that the unpaid help had already closed the vault. The following morning, the main house was a hive of frantic, discordant energy. I entered through the servants' entrance at 7 a.m., as I had for 30 years. My legs ached from the thin, lumpy mattress in the cottage, and the dampness had settled into my joints like a cold debt. I stood in the kitchen, watching Robert through the breakfast nook window. He was pacing the terrace, his phone pressed to his ear so hard his knuckles were white, his other hand tremulously smoothing his thinning hair. "I don't care about the system error," he screamed into the receiver. "Check the backup servers. The title is under Robert Vance and Eleanor Vance. It's always been under our names." He spun around and saw me standing by the stove. He hung up without a word and marched into the kitchen. He looked haggard, the silver hair uncombed, the silk shirt wrinkled. For the first time in my life, I saw the cracks in the visionary facade. He looked like a man who had finally realized the ground wasn't as solid as he'd imagined. "You," he spat, pointing a finger at me. "I have the city auditors and the private equity lead coming here for a working dinner tonight. Everything is on the line. I need this house to look like a temple of stability. I need a 7-course meal, the good crystal, and I need you to stay in the kitchen and keep your mouth shut." "I thought I was moved to the cottage to avoid the stress of the house, Robert," I said, my voice as soft as a falling leaf. "Don't be pedantic," he roared, slamming his palm on the marble. "I can't hire a catering crew on 12 hours' notice when the bank has frozen my discretionary accounts. You'll do it because you're my wife, and because if I go down, you go down with me. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. I began to crack eggs into a bowl. The sound was rhythmic, clinical. Chloe drifted in an hour later, her face pale. She wasn't carrying her phone for once. "Dad, the credit card for the venue deposit was declined. The manager called me and said the account was flagged for suspicious activity. I had to tell him it was a mistake, but he sounded weird. Mom, did you forget to pay the bill?" "I don't handle the bills, Chloe," I said, not looking up. "Your father handles the finances. He says I'm not good with numbers." "Dad?" Chloe turned to Robert, her voice rising in a thin, panicked arc. "My launch is in 3 days. The influencers are already flying in. I can't have the venue canceled." "It's a temporary glitch," Robert snapped, his voice cracking. "Go to your room, Chloe. I'm handling it." The exclusion was starting to backfire. For years, they had kept me in the dark to make me feel small. Now, the dark was where the monsters were, and they were the ones who didn't know how to navigate it. They were looking to me to provide the comfort, the food, and the stability that I had always provided, but the emotional labor was no longer being performed. I was a machine running on a timer, and the timer was nearing 0. By mid-afternoon, Meredith arrived. She didn't have her usual air of triumphant elegance. She was wearing a trench coat cinched tight, her eyes darting around the foyer. She followed Robert into his study, and through the heavy oak door I heard the muffled sounds of an argument. "10 million, Robert!" Meredith's voice was sharp. "You said the equity was secure. If the city pulls the contract, my firm is liable for the environmental consulting fees. I can't be associated with a default." "I'm working on it, Meredith. The house title is just a legal snarl. Once I clear it, I'll leverage the equity and bridge the gap." "You'd better, because if I go down for your forged signatures, I'm taking every file in that cabinet to the DA. I stood in the hallway polishing a silver tray. The mask was finally off. Meredith wasn't a partner, she was a scavenger, and Robert was starting to realize that the woman he'd chosen was just as ruthless as the world he was trying to conquer. I retreated to the kitchen to begin the prep for the crisis dinner. I worked with a slow, deliberate pace. I forgot to chill the wine. I accidentally oversalted the reduction sauce. Small, invisible sabotages that would fray Robert's nerves further. While the duck was roasting, I slipped out to the sunroom, the room Meredith was supposed to take over on Monday. I opened my laptop and checked the mystery text. A new message had arrived from the same burner number. "The lead auditor is my old college roommate Eleanor. He's already seen the blueprints. He knows the steel grade in the bridge pilings is subpar. Robert isn't just going bankrupt, he's going to jail. Do you want the files on the offshore accounts now, or do you want to wait for the dinner? D." David was moving faster than I anticipated. He wanted blood. But I wanted a clinical dissection. "Wait for the dinner," I typed back. "I want him to feel the weight of his vision one last time." At 7 p.m., the guests arrived. 2 men in charcoal suits, Mr. Sterling from the city and Mr. Hayes from the equity firm. They were grim-faced, carrying leather-bound folders that felt like lead. Robert greeted them with a manic, sweaty charm that was painful to watch. He ushered them into the dining room, where I had set the table with the heavy Victorian silver that he usually complained was too old-fashioned. I served the first course in silence. I was the ghost in the black dress, moving behind them, filling glasses with tepid water. "The discrepancies in the pilings, Robert," Mr. Sterling said, pushing a plate of tartare aside. "The specs say grade A 588, but the supplier invoices show a shipment of recycled industrial scrap. That's a criminal violation of the safety code." "There's been a misunderstanding with the foreman," Robert said, his voice an octave too high. "I have the original certifications in my safe. Eleanor, bring more wine. The gentlemen are thirsty." I walked to the sideboard. Instead of the wine, I picked up a stack of manila envelopes I had hidden behind the silver tea service. "Robert," I said, my voice cutting through his panicked rambling. It was the first time I had spoken at a dinner party in 10 years. The room went silent. The auditors looked up, surprised that the furniture had found a tongue. Robert's eyes widened, a flash of pure, primal warning in his gaze. "Not now, Eleanor," he hissed. "Go to the kitchen." "I thought the gentleman might be interested in the actual certifications," I said, walking to the table. I placed an envelope in front of each auditor. "And perhaps the bank records showing the title transfer of this house to Atheris Global? It seems the collateral for the bridge loan doesn't actually belong to Mr. Vance." Robert stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. "What are you doing? She's confused. She's been under a lot of stress." Mr. Sterling opened the envelope. He pulled out a series of documents, the real invoices, the environmental reports David had provided, and a summary of the Stone consulting fees. "These aren't specs, Robert," Mr. Sterling said, his voice turning ice cold. "These are records of embezzlement." "Eleanor!" Robert roared, reaching across the table as if to strike me. But I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, my hands folded neatly in front of me. For the first time, I looked him directly in the eye, and the homely housewife was gone. In her place was the architect of his ruin. "The space heaters in the cottage were a nice touch, Robert," I said, my voice calm and devastatingly clear. "But you were right about one thing. I don't understand finances. I control them." The curiosity hook was no longer about the money. It was about the sound of the handcuffs. The dining room, usually a place of practiced elegance, felt like a crime scene under the glare of the chandelier. The silence following my declaration was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of Robert's fear. Mr. Sterling and Mr. Hayes were no longer looking at the blueprints. They were looking at Robert as if he were a specimen of a dying species. "Control them?" Robert whispered, the words barely catching in his throat. He looked at the auditors, then back at me, a frantic, hysterical laugh bubbling up. "She's had a breakdown. You see? She's obsessed with some company she read about in the papers." "Atheris Global? That's a multinational conglomerate. My wife is a woman who spends her afternoons clipping coupons for detergent. She's unwell." "If she's unwell, Robert, she's remarkably thorough in her delusions," Mr. Hayes said, his voice cold and clinical. He held up the title deed I had provided. "This is a certified copy of the house's transfer, signed by a notary I recognize. And these invoices? They have the Atheris digital watermark." He turned to me, his eyes narrowing with a new, guarded respect. "Who are you, exactly?" "I am the chairman of Atheris Global," I said, my voice as steady as the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. "And this house is currently a registered corporate asset of my firm. Mr. Vance has been a tenant here, by my grace, for several years, a grace that has officially expired as of this evening." Robert lunged across the table, his hand catching the edge of his wineglass, sending a spray of dark red across the white linen, a bloodstain on our history. "You're lying! I built this! I gave you everything! You were nothing before me!" I was a woman who saw a mediocre man and decided to see if I could turn him into a titan, I said, looking at him with a pity that cut deeper than any insult. "But a titan requires a core of iron, Robert. You are made of nothing but sand and Meredith Stone's flattery." The mention of Meredith brought her into the room like a ghost summoned by a name. She had been hovering in the hallway, listening. She burst through the doors, her face a mask of calculated fury. "This is a joke," Meredith hissed, her eyes darting between the auditors and me. "Robert, tell them she's crazy. She's trying to steal your reputation because she's jealous of us." "Jealousy requires me to value what you have, Meredith," I said, turning to her. "But I've seen your bank statements. I know about the Atlantic City markers. I know Robert has been paying off your debts with money he embezzled from a project that is currently failing. You aren't a partner. You're a liability that is about to be liquidated." Meredith's face went white. She looked at Robert, her eyes searching for the man who was supposed to be her golden ticket. But Robert was slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, the visionary look replaced by the gray, hollow skin of a man who realized he had been playing checkers while I was moving the entire board. Chloe appeared behind Meredith, her phone in her hand, the screen dark for once. "Mom, what's happening? The auditors, they said something about jail." I looked at my daughter. I saw the expensive silk dress, the jewelry I had authorized, and the deep, selfish fear in her eyes. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask what this meant for our family. She only asked about the consequence to herself. "Your father's vision has reached its natural conclusion, Chloe," I said. The launch party is canceled. The venue has been seized for non-payment. And the lifestyle you've been filming for your followers? It was a subsidized fantasy. "But my brand!" Chloe cried, her voice thin and petulant. "I have a contract. You can't just stop it." "The contract is with a shell company that no longer exists," I said. "You should have spent less time worrying about the lighting and more time wondering where the money was coming from." Mr. Sterling stood up, gathering his folders with a sharp, final snap. "We've seen enough. Mr. Vance, the city will be filing a formal injunction tomorrow morning. I suggest you contact a criminal defense attorney. And Madam Chair?" He nodded to me, his tone shifting to one of profound professional caution. "Atheris will likely be contacted regarding the recovery of the bond funds. We'll be in touch." The auditors left, their footsteps echoing through the marble foyer like the closing of a vault. The silence that remained was suffocating. Robert, Chloe, and Meredith stood in the wreckage of the dinner, 3 ghosts haunting a house that was no longer theirs. Robert finally looked up. His eyes were red, his expression one of pure, unadulterated venom. "You've ruined us. You've destroyed your own family. Why? To feel big for a night? To get back at me for Meredith? Was it worth it, Eleanor? To be a billionaire in a house with no one left who loves you?" "I've been in a house with no one who loves me for 20 years, Robert," I said, walking toward the door. "I just decided to stop paying for the privilege." I walked toward the sunroom, the room they were going to gut. I felt the weight of their dependency now, a physical pressure. They were looking at me, waiting for me to fix it, to tell them it was a lesson, to pull the $10 million from my pocket and save them. They couldn't imagine a world where the quiet woman didn't eventually provide the cushion. But I went to the cottage. I stepped out into the night air, the scent of pine and damp earth greeting me. As I walked the path, I saw a black sedan parked near the gate. David was leaning against the hood, a cigarette glowing in the dark. "It's done?" he asked as I approached. "The auditors have the files," I said. "The injunction is coming tomorrow." "And Robert?" "He's in the dining room, trying to figure out how to be a visionary in an empty house." David looked at the main house, his expression unreadable. "You could have just divorced him, Eleanor. You didn't have to burn the whole thing down." "He didn't just want a divorce, David," I said, looking back at the glowing windows of the estate. "He wanted me in a cottage. He wanted me out of the way so he could enjoy my life with my best friend. He didn't want to leave me. He wanted to replace me while I watched." I stepped onto the porch of the cottage. I felt a strange, cold peace. The dependency was broken. The imbalance was gone. "The board meeting is Friday," I told David. "I want you in the room. When the new CEO of Vance Engineering is announced, I want Robert to see exactly which ghost is taking his chair." I went inside and closed the door. I sat at the wooden table and opened my laptop. The Atheris stock was holding steady. The world was moving on, oblivious to the collapse of the Vance family. I heard a sound outside, a car door slamming, followed by the roar of an engine. Someone was leaving, probably Meredith, heading to her next mark, or Chloe, trying to find a friend whose couch wasn't yet flagged for suspicious activity. I didn't check. I didn't care. I looked at a photo on my desk, one of me and Robert on our wedding day. We were both smiling, both young, both believing a lie. I picked up a pen and drew a single, clean line through his face. The curiosity hook remained. Robert was desperate. And a desperate man with a visionary's ego was a man who still had one last dangerous move left in him. He hadn't asked about the cottage. He hadn't asked why I was still there. He was quiet. And in this family, silence was the sound of a weapon being loaded. The dawn that followed the crisis dinner was gray and indifferent, a curtain of mist clinging to the edges of the estate. For the first time in 32 years, I did not walk to the main house to start the French roast. I did not set out the sourdough or arrange the vitamin supplements by Robert's plate. I sat on the porch of the cottage with a chipped mug of tea, watching the mechanical heart of the Vance household stutter and fail. Without my silent management, the house was a body without a nervous system. At 8:30 a.m., I saw the front door fly open. Chloe stumbled out onto the terrace, still in her silver dress from the night before, now wrinkled and stained. She was screaming into her phone, her voice carrying across the lawn like a frantic bird. The venue manager had clearly stopped taking her calls. Then came Robert. He didn't come out with his usual stride. He looked small, his shoulders hunched against the damp air. He stood on the edge of the terrace, looking toward the cottage. He knew I was there. He knew the coffee wasn't made, the accounts were frozen, and the world was watching him. He looked at the estate as if it were a foreign country he had suddenly been exiled to, despite standing in the center of it. Psychologically, the dependency was a fascinating thing to observe from the outside. They had mistaken my service for an organic function of the universe. They thought the house cleaned itself, the food appeared by magic, and the money was a natural resource that Robert produced simply by existing. Now that the host had withdrawn, the parasites were beginning to realize they didn't know how to breathe on their own. By noon, the first of the black sedans arrived. Not city auditors this time, but process servers. I watched from my window as a man in a windbreaker handed Robert a stack of legal papers on the front steps. Robert didn't fight him. He didn't shout. He took the papers with a limp hand and walked back inside, the door closing with a heavy, hollow thud. The silence lasted until 3 o'clock, when the cottage door creaked open. Robert didn't knock. He entered the small, damp space with a look of profound, bewildered exhaustion. He had removed his tie, and his white shirt was translucent with sweat. "Eleanor," he said, his voice stripped of its usual booming authority. It was a thin, reedy sound. "I've been looking at the files, the Aetheris files. You've been doing this since the beginning, haven't you? The shipyard acquisition in '95, the logistics merger in 2002. It was all you." "It was the work of a homely housewife, Robert," I said, not looking up from my laptop. "You told me the world was too complicated for me. I decided to make it mine so it wouldn't be so frightening." He sat on the edge of the cot, the cheap wood groaning under his weight. He looked at the boxes of my mother's china, then at me. A strange, manipulative softness came into his eyes, the look he used to give me when we were 20, before he decided I was a stepping stone. "We can still fix this, Elle," he whispered, using the old nickname. "The board meeting on Friday? You can stand up and say it was a strategic exercise. We can merge Vance Engineering into Aetheris. Think of the power we'd have. We'd be the most influential couple in the country. I'll handle the public face, the press, the vision. And you can keep doing what you do in the background. It'll be perfect, like it was supposed to be." The imbalance was staggering. Even now, stripped of his title and facing criminal charges, his narcissism demanded a reality where he was the face and I was the background. He was offering me the same cage, just with a larger view. "You think this is a negotiation, Robert?" I said, finally looking at him. "You think I destroyed your life because I wanted a bigger seat at your table? You still don't understand. I didn't destroy your life. I simply stopped investing in it. I withdrew my capital, emotional, physical, and financial. This isn't a strategy. It's an eviction." Robert's face hardened, the fake softness evaporating to reveal the jagged glass beneath. "You think you're so smart. You think David is going to help you? My brother was a failure, Eleanor. He was a drunk who couldn't handle the pressure. If you bring him into the boardroom, you're just inviting another ghost to tea. He has nothing. I took everything he had because he wasn't strong enough to keep it. He has the one thing you don't, Robert, a voice said from the doorway. David was standing there, his silhouette dark against the afternoon mist. He walked into the room, tossing a leather-bound journal onto the table. "I have the original ledger from 2004, brother," David said. The one that shows the pension funds didn't just disappear. They were moved into a private escrow account used to pay for Meredith Stone's first apartment and your first Porsche. You didn't just steal my life. You stole the futures of 300 steelworkers to buy a mistress. Robert stood up, his face contorting with a sudden, violent rage. "You're a dead man. You have no standing." "The dead have a way of being very loud in a courtroom, Robert," I said. The tension in the tiny room was physical, a taut wire ready to snap. Robert looked from David to me, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. He realized then that he wasn't just losing his house, he was losing his narrative. He was no longer the visionary, he was the thief. And David, the failure, was the evidence. "I won't let you do it," Robert hissed, stepping toward the table. Friday morning. I still have the keys to the server room at the firm. I'll wipe the blueprints. I'll destroy the project data. If I go down, Atheris loses the bridge contract too. You'll lose millions, Eleanor. Is your justice worth $40 million in liquidated damages? Atheris has already insured the project against executive sabotage, Robert, I said. I authorized the policy 6 months ago. Your destruction is already priced into my quarterly projections. Robert froze. The realization that even his revenge had been anticipated was the final blow. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw true, unadulterated terror in his eyes. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at a God he hadn't believed in, one who had been counting his sins in the dark. He turned and stumbled out into the mist, his footsteps heavy and uneven. David watched him go, then looked at me. "He's going to the office, Eleanor. He thinks he still has a move to make." "Let him go," I said. "The servers are already locked. The only thing he'll find in that office is a security team waiting to escort him to the curb." David nodded, but he looked troubled. "And Chloe? She's up at the house, packing. She told the guards she's moving to the city to stay with Meredith. She thinks Meredith is her way out." "Meredith left an hour ago, David," I said, checking my laptop. "Her personal accounts were seized by the bank for the Atlantic City markers. She didn't even take her leather jacket. She's gone." The household instability was complete. The family was a pile of ash, and the wind was starting to pick up. I sat in the quiet of the cottage, the blue light of the screen the only thing keeping the dark at bay. Friday was 36 hours away. Robert was desperate, Chloe was deluded, and the world was waiting for the chairman to speak. But as I looked at the security feed of the front gate, I saw a car I didn't recognize. A white SUV idling in the shadows. A notification popped up on my phone. Not from Arthur. Not from David. "He's not at the office, Eleanor. He's at the marina. He's taking the visionary out. And he has Chloe with him." My heart stopped. The visionary was our private yacht, and there was a storm coming in from the coast. The curiosity hook was no longer about the boardroom. It was about the water. Robert wasn't going to jail quietly. He was taking the only thing he had left, his daughter, into the dark. The phone felt heavy in my hand. a piece of cold glass that had just shattered the last of my detachment. Robert had always seen the visionary as his ultimate symbol of sovereignty, a 70-foot sanctuary where the laws of the land and the laws of his creditors didn't apply. He didn't see it as a vessel. He saw it as a throne. And now, he had taken Chloe, the one person who still fed his delusions, into the mouth of a gale. "David, get the car," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. I didn't wait for him. I ran toward the main house, my breath hitching in the damp air. The front door was wide open, the foyer lights flickering as the wind whipped through the marble hallway. The house was empty, a hollowed-out shell. I could hear the sound of a television still playing in Chloe's room upstairs, the upbeat, frantic music of one of her brand videos, mocking the silence below. I went to the mudroom and grabbed my heavy raincoat. On the bench sat Chloe's handbag, a designer piece she'd cried over when it was out of stock. She had left it behind. That told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't gone with him willingly. She had been swept up in his frantic, sweating panic. David pulled the sedan around, the headlights cutting through the mist like twin blades. I climbed in, my hands finally starting to shake. "The Coast Guard has been notified of the weather advisory, but Robert's transponder is off," David said, his jaw set as he navigated the winding estate road. "He's running dark, Eleanor. He's heading for the Outer Banks. He thinks if he can get to international waters, he can leverage the private accounts he thinks he still has." "He doesn't have the codes for the offshore servers," I whispered, staring out at the blurred trees. "They're biometrically locked to my thumbprint. He's sailing toward a vault he can't open." "He doesn't know that yet," David replied. "To him, the yacht is the last piece of the Vance legend. He's not thinking about logistics. He's thinking about the ending of a movie that doesn't exist." The drive to the marina took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of psychological dissection. I thought about Chloe. I had spent 28 years trying to provide a soft landing for her, only to have her call me a Midwestern tragedy. I had allowed her to believe her father was the sun, so she would feel warm, never realizing I was the one fueling the fire. Now, she was trapped in the dark with a man who was no longer a father, but a frightened ghost. As we reached the coast, the rain turned into a horizontal spray, the wind buffeting the car. The marina was a ghost town, the masts of the moored boats clinking together like 1,000 skeletal wind chimes. The slip for the visionary was empty. I stepped out of the car, the salt air stinging my eyes. I walked to the edge of the dock, looking out into the black churn of the Atlantic. Somewhere out there, the man I had married was holding my daughter hostage to his ego. "Arthur," I said into my headset, the wind nearly swallowing my words. "I need the satellite override for the visionary. Now." "It's restricted, Eleanor." Arthur's voice came through, strained and urgent. "The yacht is registered under the Vance Family Trust. To override the manual navigation, I need a court order or the primary beneficiary's authorization." "I am the primary beneficiary, Arthur. I moved the trust assets into the Aetheris portfolio 3 hours ago. Check the timestamp." There was a pause, the longest 5 seconds of my life. "Confirmed," Arthur said, his tone shifting to one of cold, professional efficiency. "Initiating remote diagnostic. Eleanor, the engine temperature is spiking. He's redlining the turbines. He's going to blow the gaskets before he hits the 5-mile marker." "Can you shut him down?" "I can kill the fuel pump, but he'll be dead in the water in 15-foot swells. It's a gamble." I looked at the water. I saw the flash of a light far out on the horizon, a single, desperate pulse of white against the gray. "Don't kill the fuel," I said. "Drop the stabilizers and lock the steering to a harbor return. If he fights the wheel, let the autopilot override the manual column. And Arthur, open the internal intercom. I want to talk to him." The speakers on the dock hummed with static. Then a low, distorted sound filtered through. It was the sound of the yacht's bridge. I could hear the wind howling, the roar of the engines, and then a sharp, terrified sob.
"Dad, please."
Chloe's voice was high, fractured with terror.
"Turn back! The waves! They're coming over the bow! Please, just stop!"
"I can't stop, Chloe." Robert's voice was a ragged, manic scream. "They're waiting for me on the shore. The auditors, the police. They want to put me in a cage. I'm a visionary. I don't live in a cage."
"You're going to kill us!"
"I'm saving us. We'll get to the Caymans. Meredith said the accounts were secure. We'll start over. A new brand, a new firm. Just you and me, the way it should have been." I closed my eyes, the pain in my chest finally breaking through the ice. He was using her as a shield for his cowardice. He was still chasing Meredith's lies, even as the ocean tried to swallow him. "Robert," I said, my voice projected through the yacht's bridge speakers. The intercom went silent for a heartbeat, save for the roar of the storm. "Eleanor?" Robert's voice was a whisper now, a haunting sound. How are you doing this? You're on the shore." "I am everywhere, Robert," I said, my voice calm, cold, and possessed of a power he had never bothered to acknowledge. "I am the stabilizers keeping you upright. I am the navigation system guiding you back. And I am the one who is going to take Chloe away from you." "You're a housewife!" he roared, the sound of a fist hitting the console echoing through the line. "You're a pathetic, drab little woman in a cottage. You don't own the wind." "No," I said, "but I own the boat. Arthur, initiate harbor return. Lock the bridge doors." I heard the mechanical whir of the electronic locks engaging. I heard Robert throwing himself against the door, his screams of, "My boat! My vision!" fading into the background. And then I heard the sound of the engines settling into a rhythmic, automated hum. The visionary was coming home. But it wasn't Robert's throne anymore. It was a transport vessel for a man who had finally run out of horizons. David stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. We watched as the lights of the yacht grew larger, the vessel fighting the swells with a mechanical stubbornness that Robert couldn't override. "The police are at the entrance to the marina," David said, "and the ambulance for Chloe." "Good," I said. As the yacht approached the dock, the hull battered and the teak deck slick with foam, I saw Chloe through the glass of the salon window. She was huddled in a corner, clutching a life vest, her face a mask of such profound, shattered realization that I knew the influencer was dead forever. She was looking at the shore, not for her father's savior, but for the mother she had called a Midwestern tragedy. The yacht bumped against the pylons with a heavy, final thud. The engines died. The silence that followed was more deafening than the storm. I didn't move toward the boat. I stood on the dock as the officers swarmed the deck, their flashlights cutting through the dark. I watched as they pried the bridge door open. I watched as they led Robert out in handcuffs, his silk shirt clinging to his frame, his eyes wide and vacant. He didn't look like a titan. He didn't even look like a man. He looked like a piece of recycled industrial scrap. As they led him past me, he stopped. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You," he whispered. "Why did you wait? You could have saved me months ago. You could have funded the bridge. Why let it get to this?" "Because I wanted to see if there was anything left of the man I married, Robert," I said. "I wanted to see if you would ever look at me and see a person instead of a servant. But even in the middle of the ocean, you only saw your own reflection." "I hate you," he spat, a final, pathetic spark of the old arrogance. "I know," I said. "But I don't think about you at all." They led him away. A moment later, Chloe was helped off the boat. She was wrapped in a gray wool blanket, her hair matted with salt. She saw me and stopped. She didn't run to me. She couldn't. The weight of her own cruelty, of years of blurring me out, was a wall she didn't know how to climb. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Go to the ambulance, Chloe," I said, my voice devoid of the warmth she was looking for. "I've arranged a room for you in the city. The house is closed." "Closed? But where will I go? What about my things?" "Your things are corporate assets now," I said. "You can file a claim with the liquidators on Monday. For now, you should just worry about being a person who doesn't need a filter to exist." I turned away from her, the sound of her sobbing lost to the wind. I walked back to the car where David was waiting. The household was gone. The family was a memory. The instability had reached its peak, and now there was only the quiet, cold aftermath of a billionaire who had finally finished her chores. But as we pulled out of the marina, David looked at the rearview mirror. "Eleanor, there's a car following us. The same white SUV from the gate." I looked back. The headlights were steady, unblinking. "It's not over, is it?" David asked. "No," I said, opening my laptop. "Meredith didn't leave the country. She went to the one place I didn't lock." The curiosity hook remained. Meredith Stone had the keys to the vault in the basement, the vault Robert thought was empty. And she wasn't alone. The rain had turned into a rhythmic, mournful drumming against the stone walls of the estate as David and I pulled up to the front gates. The house was dark, save for a single flickering light in the basement level, the heart of the machinery. The white SUV was parked haphazardly near the service entrance, its engine still ticking as it cooled in the damp air. "She's in the vault," David said, his hand lingering on the door handle. "She thinks she has the master key Robert stole from our father's study." "Robert didn't steal it," I said, stepping out into the cold. "I left it in his drawer 3 years ago. I wanted to see how long it would take for him to show it to her." We walked through the kitchen, the air still smelling of the over-salted stew and the expensive gin of the night before. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. I knew every inch of this house, every creak in the floorboards, every hidden corner where I had tucked away my true self while I played the role of the drab housewife. We descended the stairs to the basement, the hum of the Atheris servers growing louder, a mechanical heartbeat that felt more real to me than my own. The vault door was a massive, weathered piece of iron, a relic of the Vance family's original mining fortune. It stood slightly ajar. Inside, Meredith was frantic. She had a high-powered flashlight tucked under her arm, and she was stuffing bundles of documents and old ledger books into a leather duffel bag. She looked wild, her hair matted from the rain, the elegant consultant mask completely shattered. "It's not here," she hissed to herself, her voice a jagged rasp. "He said the bearer bonds were in the black box. Where is the black box?" "The black box was liquidated in 2008, Meredith." I said, stepping into the threshold of the vault. She screamed, spinning around, the flashlight beam catching me in the eyes. She squinted, her face contorting with a mixture of terror and a lingering, pathetic arrogance. "Eleanor," she gasped, clutching the duffel bag to her chest. You shouldn't be here. The police, they're taking Robert. I'm just trying to save what's left for Chloe. You're too slow to understand the legalities, but I'm protecting the assets." "You're protecting a bag of scrap paper," I said, walking toward her. I reached out and took the flashlight from her hand. She was too stunned to resist. I shone the light on the ledgers she had taken.
Those are the maintenance records for the HVAC system from the 1990s. The bearer bonds you're looking for never existed. Robert's father died broke. Robert just didn't want the A-list to know. Meredith's mouth opened and closed. "But the money, the Stone consulting fees, he said he was pulling them from the family trust." "He was pulling them from a high-interest line of credit I opened in your name, Meredith," I said, my voice low and clinical. "You see, Robert didn't have any money to give you. He was a mediocre engineer with a visionary's appetite, so I facilitated a consultancy agreement. Every cent he gave you, every weekend in Atlantic City, every piece of jewelry, it wasn't a gift. It was a loan from Atheris Global to Meredith Stone at 18% interest." Meredith dropped the duffel bag. It hit the concrete floor with a dull, heavy thud. "What? No, that's not... He said he was the provider." "He believed he was," I said. "But Robert only provided the illusion. I provided the debt. As of tonight, Meredith, you owe my firm approximately $12.4 million. I've already filed the liens against your townhouse and your firm's remaining assets. You aren't a rich mistress. You're the largest individual debtor in the Atheris portfolio." The silence in the vault was absolute, save for the hum of the servers. Meredith looked at me, her eyes wide with a horrific, soul-crushing realization. She had spent 30 years mocking the homely wife, thinking she was the one with the power, the one with the beauty, the one with the man. She had never realized she was just a line item in my ledger, a controlled variable I used to monitor the depth of Robert's betrayal. You monster," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You let him do this. You let us think. You played with our lives like they were toys." "I watched you," I corrected. "I watched you tell me my hands looked like a field hand's while you used those hands to sign your paychecks. I watched you call me a Midwestern tragedy while I was keeping you out of bankruptcy. I didn't play with your lives, Meredith. I simply allowed you to be exactly who you are." I turned to the server rack at the back of the vault. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The rack slid aside, revealing a small, sleek terminal, the true brain of Atheris Global. "Arthur," I said into the room's hidden microphone, "finalize the Stone liquidation and notify the authorities that Ms. Stone was caught attempting to tamper with corporate records at the Vance estate." "No!" Meredith lunged for me, but David stepped from the shadows, his hand firm on her shoulder. She collapsed to her knees, her sobs echoing against the iron walls. I didn't look at her again. I walked out of the vault and up the stairs, past the kitchen where the cold stew sat, past the foyer where the brass was tarnished, and out onto the terrace. The rain had stopped. The moon was high and cold, reflecting in the puddles on the marble. David came up behind me a few minutes later, the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. "She's waiting for the police," David said. "She's broken, Eleanor." "Everyone in this house is broken, David," I said.
I'm just the only one who knows how to put the pieces back together into something useful." "And the billionaire?" he asked. "The woman who owns the world? What does she do now?" I looked at the estate, the 5 acres of high-pressure lies and beautiful, expensive neglect. I thought of Chloe in her hospital room, and Robert in his cell. I had won. I had the money, the power, and the silence I had always craved. "I'm going to sell it," I said. "Every brick, every memory. I'm going to move into a small apartment in a city where no one knows my name. I'm going to buy a cat, and I'm going to read my crossword puzzles in peace." "You're retiring?" David looked surprised. I turned to him, and for the first time in 30 years, I gave him a real smile. It wasn't the soft, pathetic smile of a housewife. It was the sharp, dangerous smile of a woman who had finally finished her work. "No," I said. "I'm just going to stop being the furniture." I walked toward the gate, the mystery SUV idling there. The driver's door opened. Arthur stepped out, holding a single, slim leather folder. "The final filings, Eleanor," he said, bowing his head slightly. "Atheris Global is now a private entity. The Vance name has been legally scrubbed from the history. You are, for all intents and purposes, a ghost." "A ghost with a very large bank account," I said, taking the folder. I looked back at the house one last time. It was a beautiful, dark tomb. I thought of the rose bush I had planted by the fence, the one with the thorns no one noticed. It would bloom in the spring, long after I was gone. I climbed into the back of the SUV. As we pulled away, I didn't look through the rearview mirror. I looked ahead, at the open road and the dark, infinite horizon. The pathetic Weakling was gone. The Midwestern tragedy had ended. And for the first time in my life, the silence was no longer a weapon. It was just quiet.